Welcome in, you guys. We have a lot to talk about with this latest chapter, so hopefully you're ready for quite the conversation. Jumping straight into the chapter, we have a very uneventful first 2 pages. We have Chaka, Pell, and Igaram all looking for King Cobra and Vivi. Honestly, I don't blame Igaram for losing sight of Vivi or King Cobra simply because I lost sight of Igaram. I did not even know he was at the Reverie. I just forgot he was here in the first place. I think it's kind of funny because going into the Reverie, a lot of people thought that Pell was going to play a major role here, and that's simply because Oda had him survive a nuke in Alabasta. But it looks like that's not the case, and he's just wandering around aimlessly for King Cobra. We skip ahead a little bit, and we see that Wapol and Vivi have escaped the Reverie by stowing away on the Aegis Kingdom's ship. Wapol ends up calling Morgans because Morgans will do anything for a big scoop, and low be it for me to say, but I think Wapol has quite the scoop for Morgans. While a lot of big events happen in this chapter, I feel like Wapol, Vivi, and Morgans may be the sleeper hit combo. And that's simply because of what might happen in the future. We haven't seen Big News Morgans publish anything about the Reverie from Wapol's side yet. And when he does, I feel like that could throw the world in disarray. I mean, just think about all the possible headlines. 1. King Cobra was not killed by Sabo. Giant conspiracy theory. 2. The Gorosei can transform and they were the ones who killed King Cobra. And 3. Imu exists and sits on the empty throne. And I'm sure some people know that Saint Imu might have been somebody from 800 years ago. If Ivankov knows about it, if King Cobra knows about it, I'm sure that that rumor is going to spread around the world as well. And there's going to be other people starting to question the world government. This could be what leads the entire world into a war. I could be over-exaggerating that, but I really don't think we should underestimate the impact that Big News Morgans and the newspaper could have in the world of One Piece. So after Wapol's call with Big News Morgans, Vivi wants to grab the Denden Mushi so that she can contact her dad because her dad is such a war reward. But that's not really gonna happen because Wapol just says, hey, nope, that is a bad idea, Vivi. Stay away, swiper no swiping. And I actually think that is for the best. Some people see Wapol's actions in this chapter and say that he's a little bit callous, that he should tell Vivi about King Cobra's death. But I would argue the opposite. Wapol is making a smart decision right here. I feel like if Wapol told Vivi that King Cobra is dead, then she might storm off and try to go confirm this for herself, which would just put her and Wapol in danger. So this is for the best in my opinion. So we cut back to the red port and we see that CP0 are looking for Sabo and Vivi to no avail. And that's simply because Sabo has also escaped by stowing away on the Lelucia Kingdom's ship. And not just that, but Bonnie also stowed away on the Tajin Kingdom's ship as well. What's interesting about this is that every ship we see in this chapter, Tajin, Lelucia, and Aegis, those are all nations that later rebelled against the world government in the current timeline. So I feel like there's something there, or that's just a really crazy coincidence. But that is neither here nor there. So back to Sabo. He is gravely injured. He's actually grimacing in pain. He's not doing too good. And because of the amount of damage he's taken and because of his reactions in this chapter, a lot of people have been calling Sabo a fraud. I personally don't see it that way. I mean, Sabo was not only fighting a 1v6 and escaped with his life, but he was fighting this 1v6 against the potential final villains of the entire series. A lot of people are saying that Gorosei are at least Admiral Yonko level. Sabo had to fight all 6 of them at once, and I consider Imu a part of that if you're wondering where I got the 6 from. So yeah, in my opinion, I think Sabo came out with a massive W just by staying alive. Imagine a room with 6 Kaidos, for example. Getting out of that room is a feat in and of itself. So after checking up on Sabo, we cut back to Pangaea Castle and we see that the Gorosei are talking about him. They say that he has a checkered fate, and that's probably because he's surrounded by so many Ds. What's interesting about this dialogue is that the checkered fate portion of it is pretty much what Sengoku said about those with the Will of D as well. So it makes me wonder if Sabo is officially an unofficial D, if that makes sense. So moving on though, we get to my favorite part of the chapter. The Gorosei are talking about how Sabo should be their top priority, and that is when they get a phone call from the great Imu. Not only do we see Imu has a really silly looking Denden Mushi, but Imu talks about the Mother Flame, a weapon created by Dr. Vegapunk, and how they want to use that weapon to destroy Leloucia. The reason I really enjoy this part of the chapter is simply because we get insight as to how massive the disconnect is between Imu and the Gorosei. Their mindsets could literally not be farther apart if Oda tried. So, Imu is talking about using the Mother Flame, and the Gorosei are like, yeah, you know, the Mother Flame's great, we need to test it out, let's find an area to try it out on. And then Imu says, nah, let's use Leloucia Kingdom as the testing ground. Top Man Valkyrie says, hey, you know, there's a lot of people living there, and Imu says, yeah, that is of no consequence. And then you have some people trying to rationalize it, right? You have good old Jupiter, good old Mars saying, hey, you know, what is the reason, great Imu-sama? Why Leloucia? And then Imu says, because it's close. When I first read this part of the chapter, my mouth was wide open. And it's not because I was eating some delicious food. It was because I was in shock. The dialogue exchange between Imu and the Gorosei was akin to the dialogue exchange you'd see from a parent and child. It is that different. But nonetheless, the Gorosei have to follow whatever Imu wants. And you can tell that the Gorosei aren't exactly happy about what they're doing. You can see all of their eyes are shaded in. They don't look cheery about this whole situation. It's like they know what they're doing is wrong, but they have to follow their god regardless. And that's really just the impression I get here. And also, with this though, we get some really cool character introductions. We learn that all of the Gorosei have the title of Warrior God. And the first one we're introduced to is Saint Saturn, who is the warrior god of scientific defense, which makes a lot of sense considering he is the one being sent to Egghead Island. Next up, we have the warrior god of environment being Marcus Mars. We next have Top Man Valkyrie, who's a play on words on Mercury, being the warrior god of law. And next up, we have Saint Ethan Baron v Nasujuro being the warrior god of finance. And last but not least, we have the warrior god of agriculture being Shepherd Jew Peter. Just from a quick glance, you can tell that all of the Gorosei follow the same planetary and Roman god naming schemes as Saint Saturn and the ancient weapons. I know this is going to seem a little bit goofy to power scale people off of their names and titles, but just based on that alone, I personally feel like these guys are going to be ridiculously overpowered. I think the fun part with these names is simply trying to deduce where Oda drew inspiration for them. Yes, Oda had to follow a certain naming scheme, but minus that, Oda had free reign to name these guys whatever. For example, we have Shepherd Jew Peter. If you look up Shepherd Peter, it actually goes back to Jumanji, and we do know that Oda loves his old school movies and books, so that could be the inspiration for that one. For Ethan Baron v Nasujuro, there's actually a Japanese story about Nasu no Yoichi, and Nasu has a brother in that story named Juro. And it's kind of a big heroic tale of samurais and Buddhist monks, so I feel like that is probably where he stems from. And next, we have Top Man Valkyrie, and I have no clue where this one came from. Top Man is interesting, especially when combined with Valkyrie, because Valkyrie in Norse mythology are a bunch of women on horses that send you to Valhalla, or they take you there. So having a guy have that name, plus putting Top Man in front of it, is a little bit silly, and that could be Oda's intentions there. And then last but not least, we have Marcus Mars, and yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I have zero clue